Hey everyone, and welcome to a deep dive into the world of Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador.
AMLO.
AMLO, exactly.
Right.
We're going to be taking a look at his book, Gracias,
Yeah.
to get a firsthand look at his vision for Mexico. And he's got some pretty bold ideas
Oh, yeah.
about transforming the country
Yeah.
and tackling things like corruption and inequality head on.
Absolutely. I mean, what's really fascinating here is that AMLO isn't just tweaking existing policies,
Right.
He's going for a complete overhaul, and I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about his approach, and it all starts with this concept of austerity.
Okay, so austerity.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like?
So you can almost imagine it as like a government that's tightening its belt, right?
Okay.
So AMLO is really slashing what he sees as unnecessary government spending. So think those big salaries for officials, all those fancy perks that come with the job.
So he's freeing up government funds to use elsewhere.
Exactly. That money saved goes directly into social programs and infrastructure projects that benefit everyday Mexicans.
Okay.
And he argues that this direct aid approach is like injecting a booster shot right into those local economies,
Interesting.
especially in poorer communities.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what are some examples of these programs?
Well, there's a universal pension for senior citizens,
Okay.
which provides a safety net for the elderly. And then there's the Benito Juarez Welfare Scholarship,
Okay.
which offers financial support to students from low-income families and really aims to kind of help break the cycle of poverty.
Wow.
And then for people, who are facing different challenges, there's direct financial assistance available for people with disabilities.
It sounds like he's really trying to level the playing field there.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
But, of course, this approach has its critics.
Right.
Some worry that it could actually backfire, that it could discourage people from seeking employment and becoming overly reliant on government assistance. So it's a delicate balance.
Sure.
And we'll have to see how it plays out over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of balance, let's talk about AMLO's focus on infrastructure.
Yeah.
He's got some pretty ambitious projects in the works,
Huge.
like the Tren Maya Railway, the Santa Lucia Airport, and the Dos Bocas Refinery.
These are more than just construction projects.
Right.
These are cornerstones of his vision for a more connected and economically vibrant Mexico.
Okay.
The Tren Maya, for instance, is about more than just boosting tourism.
Yeah.
It's strategically designed to weave together these tourist hotspots with underdeveloped areas,
Okay.
especially in the historically marginalized Southeast.
So it's a way to spread economic opportunity more evenly throughout the country.
Precisely. And all of these projects aim to create jobs, modernize Mexico's infrastructure, and jumpstart regional development.
But I'm sure these mega projects have their fair share of critics.
Oh, of
Yeah,
course.
do.
Some argue that they're too expensive, they're environmentally damaging, and potentially riddled with corruption.
Well, corruption seems to be a recurring theme when it comes to Mexican politics.
Absolutely.
AMLO made tackling it a central part of his campaign in his book.
Yeah.
What's his strategy?
So he's really tackling it from multiple angles. First, he's shining a light on government spending,
Right.
making it more transparent for everyone to see where the money's going.
Right.
He's also created the Secretariat of Public Function,
Yeah.
which is a watchdog agency specifically tasked with keeping government officials in check.
Interesting.
And then to empower citizens, he's made it easier than ever for people to report corruption directly.
So it sounds like he's really trying to change the culture of governance in Mexico.
He is, and he's even using his own salary as a symbol. He drastically reduced it,
Oh, wow.
sending a message that everyone's on an equal footing and public service isn't about personal enrichment.
Interesting tactic.
It is, but some critics argue that these measures are more symbolic than effective. They point out that deep-rooted corruption can't be eliminated overnight, and it takes more than just transparency and salary cuts to change a system that's been entrenched for decades.
Yeah, for sure. So let's shift gears for a moment
Okay.
and zoom out to the global stage.
Okay.
How does AMLO see Mexico's role in the world, especially in relation to its powerful neighbor, the U.S.?
He's pushing for a more independent Mexico, one that doesn't just follow the U.S.'s lead.
Okay.
He envisions a relationship built on mutual respect and equitable partnerships, rather than one where Mexico feels like it's playing second fiddle.
So he wants a more balanced relationship with the U.S.
Yeah.
But how does that translate into actual policy?
So he's taken a pretty bold stance on trade.
Okay.
He's been renegotiating agreements like the USMCA, you might know it as TMEC,
Right.
to make sure they truly benefit Mexico. And he's not shying away from pushing back against U.S. policies he sees as unfair or detrimental to Mexican interests,
Okay.
particularly those related to immigration and border control.
That's interesting. So he's standing up for Mexico's interests,
Yeah.
but also acknowledging the importance of that economic relationship with the U.S.
Exactly. It's a delicate dance.
It is.
Some argue that he's too antagonistic towards the U.S. and that this could damage crucial economic ties. Others praise him for finally standing up for Mexico's sovereignty and demanding a more equal partnership.
It's a high-wire act, for sure.
It is.
And speaking of complex relationships, let's talk about migration.
Okay.
It's a huge issue for Mexico.
It is.
And AMLO has a very distinct approach. He's focusing less on fortifying borders and more on tackling the root causes that drive people to leave their homes in the first place.
His philosophy is that if you can create better living conditions in the countries people are fleeing from, you can reduce the need to migrate in the first place.
Okay.
So he's advocating for more economic development in Central America, for example, and pushing for greater cooperation with those countries to improve social conditions and create opportunities.
So he's looking at the bigger picture, trying to address the underlying issues instead of just treating the symptoms.
Exactly. It's a long-term strategy that requires a shift in perspective.
Right.
Some argue that it's naive and that it puts too much burden on Mexico to solve problems in other countries. Others applaud him for his humanitarian approach and for recognizing that migration is a complex issue with no easy solutions.
For sure. And shifting back to Mexico's internal challenges, let's dive into AMLO's social programs.
Okay.
Seems like these are a key part of his strategy to combat poverty and inequality.
Absolutely. AMLO believes that direct support for the most vulnerable is essential to creating a more just and equitable society.
Okay.
So in addition to the programs we mentioned earlier, he's also implemented initiatives like direct financial assistance for farmers and indigenous communities
Right.
who have historically been marginalized.
So it's about more than just providing a safety net.
Yeah.
It's about empowering people and giving them the tools they need to thrive.
That's the idea. But again, there are critics who argue that these programs are too expensive, that they're unsustainable in the long run, and might create dependency rather than genuine empowerment.
Yeah.
So it's a debate that's ongoing, and only time will tell what the long-term effects of these policies will be.
This is all fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our deep dive into AMLO's world,
Sounds good.
exploring his controversial approach to public safety, his bold vision for Mexico's energy future, and more.
Stay tuned. Welcome back. We've been exploring AMLO's grand vision for Mexico, from his focus on social programs and infrastructure to his desire for a more independent stance on the world stage.
It's been a whirlwind tour of his policies so far.
It has.
And it seems like almost every single one comes with its fair share of both praise and criticism.
That's the nature of bold leadership, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
Whenever you try to shake things up and challenge the status quo, you're bound to ruffle some feathers along the way, and AMLO certainly isn't afraid of a little controversy.
Let's dive into one of the most controversial areas, public safety.
Okay.
Mexico has been grappling with a surge in violence, much of it driven by powerful organized crime groups and drug cartels. How is AMLO tackling this complex problem?
So he's taking a two-pronged approach.
Correct.
On one hand, he's created this new security force called the Guardia Nacional
Okay.
to confront these criminal organizations head-on.
Okay.
And this force combines elements of the federal police, the Army, and the Navy
Wow.
with the aim of creating a more coordinated and effective fighting force.
So it's a show of force, but it sounds like there are concerns about bringing the military into the equation.
There are critics worry that relying too heavily on the military to handle domestic security could lead to human rights abuses and a more authoritarian approach to law enforcement.
What about the other prong of his strategy, addressing the root causes of this violence?
So AMLO believes that a lot of this violence stems from poverty, inequality, and a lack of opportunities, particularly for young people.
Okay.
And he argues that if you can address those root causes,
Yeah.
you can reduce the allure of criminal activity.
So his social programs, the job creation initiatives, those are all part of his strategy to combat violence.
Exactly. He sees it as this holistic approach. You can't just fight crime with guns and arrests. You need to create a society where people have hope, where they have a chance to build a better future for themselves. It's a long-term strategy.
Yeah.
And it remains to be seen whether it will truly be effective in curbing the violence that has plagued Mexico for so long.
Now let's turn to another area where AMLO is making waves, energy reform.
Right.
He's made it clear that he wants Mexico to control its own energy destiny.
This is a cornerstone of his vision for a truly independent Mexico. He's looking to roll back some of the previous energy reforms that opened up the sector to private and foreign investment, arguing that they benefited foreign companies at the expense of Mexico's national interests.
So he's trying to strengthen state-owned energy companies like Pemex, the oil giant, and CFE, which handles electricity.
Precisely, he wants them to be the driving force behind Mexico's energy production and distribution, reducing reliance on foreign companies and energy imports.
But hasn't that approach been criticized for potentially scaring off foreign investment and stifling innovation?
Yeah, there are definitely concerns about that. Critics argue that state-run companies are often less efficient and more prone to corruption. They worry that this push for nationalization could lead to higher energy costs for consumers and make Mexico less competitive on the global market.
It sounds like a pretty risky gamble.
It does.
What's AMLO's counterargument?
Well, he believes that by bolstering these national companies, he can create jobs, boost economic growth, and ensure that the profits from Mexico's energy resources stay within the country. He's also investing in renewable energy sources like solar and wind power, aiming for a more sustainable and self-reliant energy future for Mexico.
Interesting. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about another hot-button issue. AMLO's approach to foreign policy.
Okay.
He's called for a more independent Mexico on the world stage. What does that look like in practice, especially when it comes to the country's relationship with the United States?
It's a balancing act on one hand. AMLO has been quite vocal in his criticism of some U.S. policies, particularly those related to immigration and trade.
Right.
He wants to assert Mexico's sovereignty and ensure that the relationship is more of a two-way street built on mutual respect and benefit.
So he's not afraid to stand up to the U.S. when he feels it's necessary?
Not at all. He's been a vocal advocate for the rights of Mexican migrants in the U.S., and he's pushed back against what he sees as unfair trade practices. But at the same time, he recognizes the importance of maintaining a strong working relationship with the U.S., especially on economic issues.
That makes sense. The two countries are deeply interconnected. Economically, geographically, and culturally, it's a delicate dance.
It is.
Trying to stand your ground while also recognizing the realities of the situation.
And some argue that he hasn't always been consistent in his approach, sometimes talking tough, but then backing down when faced with pressure from the U.S. Others see him as a skillful diplomat who's trying to navigate this complex relationship and find ways to assert Mexico's interests without jeopardizing the economic ties that are so vital to both countries.
We've explored some of AMLO's most ambitious and controversial policies, his efforts to combat poverty and violence, his vision for energy independence, his desire for a more assertive foreign policy. These are all huge undertakings, and the potential consequences are enormous.
What's striking about AMLO is that he's attempting to tackle these issues in a holistic way.
Okay.
He sees them as interconnected. You can't address poverty without addressing corruption. You can't address violence without addressing inequality. You can't achieve true independence without control over your own energy resources.
It's a bold vision, and it's definitely generating a lot of debate, both within Mexico and internationally.
For sure.
Some see him as a transformative leader who's finally addressing the country's deep-rooted problems,
Yeah.
while others worry that he's going too far too fast and that his policies could ultimately backfire.
That's the thing about trying to create lasting change.
Yeah.
It's messy, it's unpredictable, and it rarely goes according to plan. But AMLO is clearly someone who believes in the power of big ideas and bold action.
So what does the future hold for Mexico under AMLO's leadership? What are the potential long-term consequences of his ambitious agenda? We'll delve into those questions and more as we continue our dunk dive into AMLO's Mexico in the final part of our episode. Stay tuned. Welcome back. We spent the last two parts of our deep dive exploring AMLO's vision for Mexico, a vision that's as ambitious as it is controversial.
Right.
We've covered everything from his austerity measures and infrastructure projects to his social programs and his approach to security and foreign policy.
It's been quite a journey.
Yeah, it has. And we've seen that AMLO is not afraid to challenge the status quo,
No.
to shake things up and try to forge a new path for Mexico.
Right. He's a bold leader.
But as we've discussed, this path is not without its potential pitfalls.
So there are definitely some bumps in the road.
Right. With any grand experiment, there are always unintended consequences.
Always.
And it's impossible to predict with certainty what the long-term impacts will be.
You can never know for sure.
So let's put on our prognostication hats for a moment
Okay.
and consider some possible scenarios. What are some of the potential long-term outcomes of AMLO's policies, both the rosy ones and the not-so-rosy ones?
Well, let's start with the potential upsides.
Go.
Imagine a Mexico where AMLO's social programs are a resounding success. Poverty rates plummet, inequality shrinks, and millions of Mexicans are lifted into a more stable and prosperous life.
Okay, so a better life for millions.
Right. And his investments in education pay off, creating a more skilled workforce that attracts new industries and drives economic growth.
So a sort of virtuous cycle where social investment leads to economic empowerment.
Exactly. And imagine further that his energy reforms, despite the initial skepticism, actually work.
Yeah.
Pemex and CFE become leaner, greener, and more efficient, providing affordable and reliable energy to Mexican businesses and households while reducing dependence on foreign energy sources.
It sounds like it could be a win-win.
It could be, but I think we also need to consider the flip side.
Right, the darker potential outcomes.
Exactly. What if those social programs, while well-intentioned, prove unsustainable in the long run? The government runs out of money, the economy stagnates, and the very people AMLO is trying to help end up worse off than before.
So the potential for things to backfire.
Right, and we've talked about the risks associated with his push for energy independence. What if nationalizing those industries leads to inefficiency, corruption, and ultimately higher energy costs for consumers?
And what about its foreign policy?
Yeah, that's another big one.
What if instead of leading to a more balanced relationship with the U.S., it actually damages those crucial economic ties?
It's a possibility Mexico could find itself increasingly isolated on the world stage, struggling to attract foreign investment and compete in the global marketplace.
It seems like there are a lot of what-ifs on the table.
There are a lot of unknowns.
So much depends on how these policies are implemented, on the choices that AMLO and his administration make in the years ahead.
Absolutely. And a lot will depend on factors beyond his control. Global economic trends, shifts in the political landscape, unforeseen events like natural disasters or pandemics. Governing is a complex and messy business.
For sure.
And even the most well-intentioned leaders can be blindsided by unexpected challenges.
Yeah, it's a reminder that we're not just talking about abstract policies here, but about the lives of real people. The decisions that AMLO is making will have a profound impact on the lives of millions of Mexicans for generations to come.
And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to engage in critical thinking, and to hold our leaders accountable regardless of our political leanings.
Right.
The future of Mexico is being shaped right now, and it's a story that's still being written.
As we wrap up this deep dive into AMLO's Mexico, we'd like to leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
The future is never predetermined. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads, individual choices, collective actions, historical forces, and sheer chance.
And while we can't predict the future with certainty,
Right.
we can choose to be active participants in shaping it by staying informed, engaging in thoughtful debate, and demanding better from our leaders.
Well, thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration and discovery.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of AMLO's vision for Mexico, the challenges he faces, and the potential long-term consequences of his ambitious agenda.
And we hope you'll continue to explore these issues and keep learning.
Absolutely. Until next time.